What's up, everybody? Welcome back or welcome to the Science of Gaming series brought to you by AimLab. I'm Taylor Johnson, and in this episode, we speak with Nick Ashes Ridgway. He's been a part of one of the most dominant teams in esports with Optic Gears of War and now UYU. They've won 22 of the last 26 events they've been a part of. He's got a phenomenal mind on what it takes to really develop player talent. So we talk about what he looks for in players and how to build that up, teamwork and communication and the fundamentals of that and how important that is to gameplay and success, and then also mental health in gaming. If you dig these videos, like it, comment, leave us some feedback on what you want to see more of, and also subscribe to our channel. Hope you enjoy. Ashes, what's up, man? It's great to have you on.
How's it going, buddy?
It's going well. I'm stoked to have you on for this conversation. Obviously, we've worked together in the past, and I'm just super stoked on where you're at in your career and where you continue to go. So, if you could just kind of give, a brief background on yourself of where you're at and what you're up to.
Yeah, my name is Nick. I go by Ashes in the gaming world. I have been in esports for about 10 years. I started off, as every young kid competing, loving video games, loving the thrill of going to events and the competition, and quickly realized that the time consumption was not going to work with my collegiate schedule. So I switched into that management and coaching role, and I really found a passion for esports on not only the business side but on the player development side. So kind of fast forwarding through a bunch of failed teams in League of Legends, I got to the point where I got a chance to work with some young up and comers for the game Gears of War. This was back in about 2015, and I did had no idea at the time, but we ended up creating what is widely known as one of the most dominant teams in console esports and our own dynasty, which has been amazing to be a part of. We've gone on a tremendous tear, winning like 22 out of 26 or 27 events over the last 5 years. So, in three different Gears of War titles. So, um, now I focus mostly on the player development side, working with this team, how to perfect pros and not let them plateau or hit a ceiling, but continuing to push them forward. And then on top of that, I work as a general manager. So, a lot of the management and business side of esports as well.
Awesome. So, what I want to dive into first is just talking about player talent identification and development. All right. So what is it? What are you looking for in your players? And like obviously with the Gears team, it was kind of like you stepped into this environment where you already had a ton of talent. But from what you saw within them, and then also what you're seeing in other players, what are the key things you're looking for?
I think one of the things, without being able to actually work directly with the player or be involved in, a player's practice that is not part of my team, the things that I notice are their decision making abilities in the game. So there's a lot of times where players can have really flashy moments, and this is in any esport, in any game. We've all seen those kind of like clutch plays where a player just does something incredible. Um, but a lot of times those situations, those moments drown out the consistent good decision making. And so if I notice that a player has consistent good decision making, and what I mean is they're positioning themselves in the proper places or they're making the correct plays and rotations, um, then that to me shows that, okay, there's talent on a mechanical level, but they also have the ability to recognize, have quick critical thinking, and execute on whatever their idea is, and it's accurate. That is how I can see a player is going to have a tremendous talent for the game. Because it's easier to teach the mechanical abilities. Like that's one of those things where you can work on it. Like if you want to be stronger, you lift more weight and you do it gradually over time. You know what I mean? So to me, mechanical abilities, like yes, there's this natural gift element, but it's also something that you can just work on honing and developing. Whereas that decision making, having that innately is almost something special. So when I see that in a player, that's how I know, okay, this guy is going to be a really good player and we need to keep an eye on him.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what I'm hearing is, kind of these different buckets. It would be like mechanical skill, game knowledge, game sense, probably some teamwork and communication in there too, right? To be able to communicate what's going on in game. And then also that tactical decision making and being able to execute on all of those and also develop each one of those skills both independently and collectively.
Definitely. And I think when you see those skills and that ability to make the proper decisions, usually along with that, you kind of have like two different extremes. You either have the person who like almost talks too much because they're used to expressing and explaining like their thought process, or you have the people who are so focused on what they're doing that they don't talk enough. But communication is so important for esports in general because it's a team-based game. Any team-based game is going to be, requiring that. So I think that it's kind of like a good sign if you can see someone who could already think through the process, and then teaching them to communicate is like the next step if they don't already.
Right. So I want to put a pin in that, come back to that in a little bit, around the teamwork and communication. Uh, but I guess like first, what are you seeing are like the biggest differences, between an aspiring pro and a pro player?
I think a lot of people who are aspiring pros, and this can kind of branch across various esports. They talk the talk, but they don't want to walk the walk. And I know that sounds really cliche, but what I often see is players who are saying, "I would do anything to be pro. I would do anything to be on UYU, or I do anything to be on this team or that team." And what ends up happening is they're not willing to put in the hours. They're not willing to go that extra mile. They get on and they play their scrimmages, but are they really working to do anything better? And something that I'm going to relate back to, the gym and the weightlifting or conversation. Um, if you're going to the gym and you're just lifting, 5 pounds over and over again, you can be there for an hour, but you're not really gonna be developing muscle and getting stronger, right? Like, you're an expert in that kinda area, so, you know what I mean? Like, that's not gonna help you get into that physical peak condition because you're just doing almost like your bare minimum. It's not really an exercise, it's not really a workout. So a lot of players just get on and they run through the motions. They operate at that baseline level the entire time that they're scrimming, and then they get off, and that was their 6 hours of commitment to the craft in their day, and then wonder why they're never getting better. And that's not how you improve. For example, when we get on and we get on with objectives in mind. We get on knowing that we're going to work on specific things, whether it be a map or individual plays or individual rotations or just the player's communication overall or certain aspects of our gameplay. We have objectives in mind. We're working towards those. We're figuring out ways that we can continue to hone and develop those so that anytime a weakness of our in our game pops up, we're immediately attacking that and fixing that weakness rather than just going, well, we got on, we clocked in our hours. Hopefully we'll still be the best team in the world tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, the difference would be at the professional level, it's very intentional, with objectives, strategies, and tactics, how you're approaching practice, how you're approaching your debriefs, how you're mapping out your days. And maybe for the aspiring pros, they don't necessarily get that just yet.
Mhm.
And I think that's where, at least I've seen a big missing in terms of player development, as they're are coming up through the ranks, because it's really not formalized yet. There's really not a straight path of how you become pro yet.
Yeah.
So I think what you're speaking to is really important for a lot of people listening to understand. It's really good to have a framework of how you want to operate and handle your business. And then also, using that weight room analogy or just in life in general, you got to find your edge. You have to find your edge and push yourself just to that edge and just lean over that edge to see what that's like. And the more you can do that, the more you expand yourself as a person and as your craft and self mastery.
Definitely. It's about pushing yourself. If you're not pushing yourself, then you're not going to achieve that next level. If you're not, finishing scrims or finishing your practice session and going like holy crap, I'm like mentally kind of exhausted from that, then you weren't really exercising your brain and you weren't developing it and helping yourself make better decisions when it becomes that crunch time. Um it's all about preparation for when the moment strikes, and a lot of people don't put in the like proper preparation, but then they lie to themselves. It's almost like they rather satisfy the ego of, yes, I did what I was supposed to do and I feel good now because I'm telling myself I did what I was supposed to do, rather than acknowledging the fact that, like, hey, maybe I didn't practice as hard as I should have, or maybe I didn't put in the work that I should have, and then facing that reality and getting better so they can feel good when the time actually matters.
Right. Yeah. And, another key point on that too is, going through practice and having those moments where you're, mentally and physically exhausted. I think a big part of the player development and the maturity that comes in as well is knowing, how hard to push consistently and when to back off so that you can continually peak over time. And I think with a lot of young players, like they try to just grind and they don't have any rhyme or reason to how they're practicing. And I think this goes back to what you were speaking on of being very intentional with the objectives in practice and knowing like, hey, here's what we're going after this practice. Let's be very specific. And I think a lot of young players are still lacking in understanding like it's a holistic model.
Yeah.
It's and I know you do a great job of that. It really kind of building that framework for your players to be successful and to understand what's going on with practice, and then also to have those deloads where it's like, hey, you may have some fatigue and like that's okay, and like let's communicate that and let's continue to work in a way that's workable for everybody so that as a group we continue to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, we're human beings, so there's not anybody in the world who's going to operate at 150% or even 100% every single day. You know, it could be something as simple as your arm was slightly wrong when you slept and now it's hurting, or you have a headache, or any kind of external factor that you can't control, and that could affect your ability to train, practice, and then succeed in that regard. So, you know, that's where back coming back to communication, like you mentioned, it's important to be able to say and admit to your teammates, like, "Hey guys, like I didn't sleep that well last night. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm still trying to do my best, but if I'm off, that's why." And, if you're on a good team that understands you're all there for the same goal, then, they'll have your back, which is, I mean, we've experienced that. People have gotten on tired and it happens. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, I mean that's I know your team well. I mean, right, we worked together when we were at Infinite and Optic, and so what I always appreciated and really respected about you and those players is the level of communication that's happening on a day-to-day basis. Even for small things, when they would show up to workouts and we would have a training session, if a guy was late or, if somebody was dragging a little bit, it was a open conversation to meet them where they're at and say,
mhm.
okay, let's reset the game plan. And collectively as a unit, let's figure out what's best in this situation.
Definitely, and I mean, it even goes down to, like, we have a group text and, like, the routine I mean, not when we're in an off season on break, but the routine is, like, every day, everyone just says, like, "Good morning" in the chat, and then conversations start, like,
Yep.
it's almost like a trickling effect, like, we're not just teammates or coworkers, we're, like, a small family, and, like, they check in on each other, or someone will be like, I just got bad news," like, my friend is sick, or whatever the case may be, and you've got five other people there to support you. So building that kind of connection comes pretty much solely through communication and being able to communicate effectively and well.
So let's dive into communication a bit more. I mean, what do you think are the key pillars for teamwork and communication?
uh I think in terms of communication, um you have to be on some levels comfortable with vulnerability. And what I mean by that is there's going to be points where you are required to communicate, even if you're not entirely comfortable with it, even if it makes other aspects of you not be at your best. So, for example, if you're in a game and you're in the moment, a lot of people focus in on like the fight that's right in front of them rather than actually actively talking about the fight that's right in front of them. That's kind of how, we experience gaming. Almost everybody's first experience with gaming is sitting at home playing by themselves against the computer, right? So there's not that communication aspect. But as soon as you can start kind of training yourself to be like, look, I gotta be comfortable with the fact that I'm trying to get better at communication. Therefore, I might not hit all the shots that I normally hit, and I might suck a little bit more than I normally suck, but it's gonna be better for me in the long run. So I just gotta kinda swallow this ego, be a little bit vulnerable, and know that I can bring that skill level back once I get used to talking at the same time. That's usually the most common thing that I see. And then when you're building those relationships with your teammates, being able to be, build those bonds like I was talking about and be more than just a teammate or a coworker, be, like a small family. Because if you can build that relationship and that trust outside of the game, that carries into your trust and the relationship you have inside of the game. So this guy is going to have your back because how much a win means to him, how much he needs this money, how much he wants to help support his family and his mom, and so that he's going to do everything he can to help you and help him win that match. because of that connection that you've made outside of the game. And so you can trust him to make the right play, make the right decision, have your back when you make a play, respond to your call outs. All of that stems from one core source, and that's being able to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, what I'm hearing in there too are a few things. One is, for being in a team fight and having that vision narrow. So basically changing your vision to kind of open up to the peripheral and see everything that's going on, and then also be able to communicate that. And that's definitely a skill that needs to be trained. But then also what I'm really hearing with that last part is it's about culture,
Hmm.
right? It's about culture, which then sets the psychology of how you're going to communicate, how you're going to debrief, and really how you're going to build those relationships and those bonds that are ultimately going to make you be a more successful individual and a successful team.
Definitely. And you're in a kind of fortunate situation where um, you're not being forced into like this isn't like blind dating. You know what I mean? Like you're not forced into an awkward situation where you just have to find some common ground and then go from there. You already have that common ground. You're both trying to win at whatever your game is. You both clearly love whatever your game is. So you have that commonality with someone. It doesn't matter where they're from, what language they speak. Well, I mean, it might matter what language they speak, but what their ethnicity is or anything like that. It doesn't really matter in our world because you already have that commonality. Now you can take off from that spot and build that relationship. So, for me, for example, one of my teammates, his gamer tag is praised, and he is from inner city New York, and very much like he's Dominican, and he's very much got that New York culture and way about him. And that's very much not me. I'm from kind of more suburban areas of Maryland, right? So it's almost like a little bit of a culture shock when he comes on board. He's very loud. He's very
I
New
remember.
York.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You experienced it.
He's
So
awesome. Yeah.
but he's honestly like one of the most down to earth, nicest guys. Has your back through anything. Is your biggest supporter, your biggest fan, and will like lead the charge if you need him to. So but on the surface level, it's almost like intimidating, right? So, um, I've personally experienced that. So, and I think like because we had that commonality of we both wanted to win, we both like want the best for the team, we both have a passion for our esport, then like that culture shock kind of goes away because you're focused on the task at hand, and then you build that bond because you have that mutual love, and the conversation start from there. And so it's really just like it's so important to be able to look past things that you might look past or not look past in the real world, and be able to just like I said, run from that common ground and use that as your tool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and also what I'm hearing too is, you know, you, the teams really unite behind a common goal,
Mm,
right? And then from that, you reverse engineer the outcomes and behaviors that you want to achieve. And those are two different things, right? Like the outcome is the outcome, and the behavior is what is needed, what needs to be true in order to get there. And I think for a lot of people, they tend to just say, okay, well, the outcome's the outcome. Like, let's just go get that. And they don't really take the time to think through, well, what needs to be true on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, monthly basis for me to actually achieve that. And so much of that comes down to the culture and the communication and the psychology, which then trickles down into, the tactics and the team management.
yeah.
So as a manager, how are you operating within the team to help facilitate better communication? And then maybe like, what's a story that you have found? Like, what's one of your fondest stories of you were like, man, that was like huge insight from this one experience? And what were some lessons from that? And then what did you then take to then move that into and integrate into your coaching managing style?
I think so to kind of tackling that like one point at a time, I think as a manager, my biggest thing is to make sure that the players really only have to focus on competing. Like they don't have the external like worries. They're not ordering their own jerseys. They're not needing to schedule their own practice. I mean, sometimes they schedule scrims, but not needing to schedule their own practices, or not even needing to like check if everyone's going to be on, like making sure their four other teammates are going to be on the game at the right time. These are all things that like used to be an issue in specifically in Gears of War. It became like, okay, everyone's getting on around 8, cool, I'll be on. Oh, you have extra homework, all right, see you at 9. And then let's tweet out and see if we can find a scrimmage, and we'll play for an hour and a half, and then that was fun. And like that's not optimal at all, especially when you're starting to get into, more and more competitive environments and larger prize pools and professionalism. Um, so making sure that all of that is taken care of is really important to me, because I want them just to be able to focus on. I know that if I get on at 4 o'clock and join, TeamSpeak, then my teammates will be there and we'll be playing together. And then we have scrimmages from 5 to 7, 7 to 9, 9 to 11, and then I can unwind from there. So like they have that structure, they know their day, and that's important for me to help establish for them. Um, and then even going a step further as a coach, figuring out what those practice blocks or the blocks are going to actually look like, what we're working on, what we're trying to develop, making sure that we're achieving the right things. If somebody's off, figuring out why they might be off. Do we need to change our focus because somebody didn't sleep well? So it's not going to be realistic work towards what we're working on. Um, just kind of being able to make those adaptations on the fly. In terms of like a story where I really kind of gained a lesson or an experience with the team, um, I think there's a few moments where I, the bonds between us have been strengthened. It kind of comes back to that you have to be comfortable to be vulnerable. So I'll talk about one that was harder for me. There was a point actually kind of recently where uh, the the practice schedule and our performance in scrims was not going well, and then our it was kind of translating over into our performance in tournaments as well. And we had been trying to figure out for a very long time what was going wrong. We were trying different things, and it just nothing seemed to be working. And so there was like that issue. And then obviously the world is a very weird place right now with COVID and with just all the crazy stuff that you see going on. And this was around the time that like the BLM stuff was, flaring up on social media. So like that's you either saw COVID or you saw BLM, which is very important to stay updated on both. But it just felt like no matter what people were doing, there was just constant negativity being flooded at us, at people. Um, so we've got scrims not going well, we've got that not going well, and there was just other bad news coming in life. A friend passed away, and so it just felt like so crushing. And for the first time ever, I experienced only what I can like self-diagnose as anxiety attacks, and it was a very crippling feeling. And then I started getting worried about, okay, well, if I explain this to the team, like I know they have my back, but will they be able to understand because it's such a non uh like physical thing. Like it's not like, "Oh, I hurt my arm or my hand's broken and I can't hold a controller." It's completely a mental thing and there's no logical reason for it. I can recognize that, but it's still a very real feeling of this like crushing emotional weight and guilt and like just negative feelings in like the pit of my stomach. Um so I ended up explaining it to them and kind of worried that they weren't going to be able to understand and react to it well. And they immediately were super supportive and saying like if you need time off, like take it, like it's important. And then some of them even like on an individual level, not even in our group chat, were reaching out to me and like, hey, like I've dealt with some stuff like this when, I had this happen in my life. So if you need any advice of things that work for me, like let me know. And like that kind of role of like me being a leader for the team and me being the manager and the coach, and it kind of shifted and they were able to help me um just through those relationships that we've built over the last couple years, and they showed that support, and to me that meant like the world, and it helped tremendously kind of like relieve that level of stress. So then I could focus on, just helping myself over the next day or two and getting back to where I needed to be to continue to help him on a professional level. So I think to me, like that was a moment where I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to communicate properly. I was worried that they weren't going to be able to understand. And I was worried that it was going to affect something about our relationship. Maybe they would have less faith in me as a coach because I can't even, handle myself. You know what I mean? Um, but I couldn't have been more wrong. They were super supportive and just showed like everything that we've been doing over time and these relationships we've been building, like it goes both ways, and it was just a prime example of that.
Yeah. Well, first, Nick, I really appreciate you sharing that. And it's challenging at times to really be vulnerable and open up and be able to communicate, especially to those that are really close to us. Sometimes it's strange. Like the ones closest to us are the ones that we don't necessarily always want to share with.
Yeah.
And I think what in that story, what I'm hearing is like the lesson of really getting like the strength of the bonds, the teamwork, and also part of being a leader is just being vulnerable and really setting an example of how to share and how to really step up and be like, hey, look, we're all human, and here's what I'm going through. Here's my commitment to myself, to the team, and people really get inspired from that. I mean, even just listening, I'm like, yep. I mean, because I've known you for a while, and like I see you as a leader, and I respect you. So I really appreciate you doing
Thank
that, and
you.
I'm sure the players themselves. I mean, just from them reaching out independently, it everybody can resonate with that, especially during these times. I mean, it's rough
Yeah.
times. So I think that's a good lesson for everybody else too. To like, it's okay to be vulnerable and to share what's going on with yourselves. And I think for many, we've been conditioned not to. This is
Mhm.
just a new day and age, man, and it's just the way we operate needs to change because it doesn't fit the old model.
Definitely. I mean, like I'm biased because my degree is in psychology, but mental health is so important, and especially when you come down to an esport where, I mean, any esport where it's not so much the physical demand like you would see in traditional sports, but it's the cognitive load, it's the mental demand. Then I feel like it's almost even that much more important. Like you can be stressed and you can go work out to relieve that stress. And I feel like that might be um, something that helps like athletes, once they get in the zone. I mean, I can't really speak for them, but I imagine, being able to go out there and your job is basically an exercise. Um, you can, release those endorphins and start feeling better, and that stress kind of goes away as you're, competing. You'll still have the stress of the competition, but it's not, the other stuff probably goes away a little bit easier. But for us, a lot of it is sitting here, in front of our screen. We don't have those same endorphins. We might have the adrenaline rush, but we don't have those same the chemicals in our body being released because we're not doing the physical activity. Um, and so the stresses stay there, the thoughts stay there, and you really have to be able to mentally deal with those, block those out, or address those beforehand and work to fix those. So I think mental health is super important. And I mean, again, this ties back to being able to communicate effectively, so and be vulnerable.
Definitely. And, my background, obviously, in, being a performance coach in college and the NFL, I mean, the exercise component was always there. What I found was sometimes missing was the communication around mental health,
Mm,
and I see this a lot in many different industries, not just in traditional sports or even in gaming, where it's, you just grind, you just put your head down, you grind. And then that's what leads to burnout because
yeah.
there's not these outlets to be able to express what's really going on for somebody. And so I think, now more than ever, especially during these times, it's a great opportunity to let that story go and know that it's okay. People are there to support you, and reaching out is important. And, I have affinity towards the psychology too. I mean, my undergrad, my minor was in psychology. I wanted to be a sports psychologist for a long time and then just went the route of exercise physiology.
Mhm.
But I think the more I think about it now, and especially with player development and the stuff that you're working on, the psychology component is huge. And that really sets the tone for everything else. It basically sets your physiology, how you think directly impacts how your body performs.
Yeah.
So the more tools that players can have, especially the young players, I mean, any age, but the young players, especially as they're coming up, to be able to deal with the stressors, to be able to manage their time, and to understand that they have these outlets that are there for them to help them improve as human beings and also as players is really crucial.
Yeah, um it's a lot, when you're out there competing and dealing with the stresses of that and the stresses of real life, it becomes a lot, and especially if you're not doing well. If you have the confidence and you have the ability and you have the track record of doing well and you just suddenly stop and whatever you're doing feels like it's not working, that's when it gets really tough. And I think from this honestly, these last 2 months where we hit um it wasn't a wall because it just seemed like nothing could go our way, and nothing that we did was working. I don't wanna consider that like, "Oh, we hit a skill ceiling and we struggled to push through it." Um, it was almost like you just hit one of those funks, and for us, it was one of, like, the longest ones that we've been in, and I think, it's that kind of situation is probably really difficult for a lot of people to handle, especially when you're an up and coming player and all you wanna do is be the next great pro, and you believe in yourself to have that ability, but it feels like no matter what you do or what team you join, you always fall a little bit short. So, being able to have that ability to communicate that and how you feel about that helps you not have that as a pressure on the back of your mind the next time you're ready to compete. You know, if you place 32nd 4 times in a row, but you have the knowledge and the belief in yourself that you can uh, achieve way more than that, then being able to almost like vent about like how like frustrating that is and what you need to do to improve for the next time I think that's super crucial for esports athletes.
Yeah, I mean, that last point I think is incredibly important for any sort of high performer. And being able to write down objectively what happened and then
Mm,
your stories and interpretations of what happened, because they're two could be very different things, right? Like what happens and what you make it mean are two very different things.
yeah.
And I see a lot of players spin out on that quite a bit. They get caught up in these stories that they make about what happens. And so having a process of one, understanding how you learn and how you debrief your day, what went well, what went wrong, what are lessons learned, what are the big wins, like acknowledge yourself for the things you did do right, because I feel like far too often people don't actually acknowledge themselves for the small things that they do or the big things that they do.
Mhm.
It's a weird dynamic where they're like, oh well, I didn't do anything good today. I'm like, well, actually you did a lot of good stuff today.
Yeah.
So I think getting in the practice of acknowledging yourself and acknowledging others and having gratitude for that. So having a practice of being able to journal and write that stuff down, because as soon as you can get it out of your mind onto paper or on the computer in a Word doc, whatever it may be, it takes it out of that fight or flight response and you're getting it out of paper and you can look at it objectively. And I would imagine, a lot more players are starting to get tuned into this with the work with sports psychologists and understanding, just more dynamics around communication and understanding their own thought processes.
Yeah, I think, I think you made a great point there, like, the gratitude journals is something that I think is overlooked, and building that habit of being, thankful for things that you accomplish, even if they're really small. Um, I think that's super important. I mean, again, I can relate this to a personal story of not necessarily gratitude journaling, but, being comfortable with the fact that I'm making small steps to improve my physical health and satisfied with the fact that even though that they're smaller steps, they're still steps towards improvement rather than making a giant leap of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to the gym and I'm gonna work out for 2 hours and then I'm gonna feel miserable because I'm completely out of shape. And then I'm not gonna be wanting to do that again. Whereas like right now, I've added like walking as a daily routine to my schedule because I just like my walking routine was from my office to my bedroom or kitchen or whatever. So, adding just small steps like a 30-minute walk, a mile walk, a 2-mile walk, like adding that helped me feel so much better because I knew I was taking steps to like slowly build up and I wasn't feeling self-conscious about those steps that I was taking in comparison to the people who are like, yeah, I went to the gym, bench press 400 pounds and then ran on the treadmill for 6 hours. Like I didn't need that. I just needed to do something.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like a mental exercise of like being satisfied with the small steps rather than needing like the whole thing at once. So if you take that back to a competitive gamer, an esport athlete, a lot of people want to just achieve it all kind of at once, like overnight, but it's a process and you have to take small steps and you have to be satisfied with those small steps that you're taking and understand that every experience is a learning experience to help you be better for the next time, good or bad.
Yeah, I love that. I'm glad you brought it back to that because I was going to touch on that point too. It's, if you think about the your daily activities and what you're talking about with the walks and just doing like the minimum dose that you feel good about, and then you just compound that over time. And it's the same thing as young players are coming up. It's like, okay, yes, you want to be a pro player, great. It's not going to happen overnight. So what are the steps? Like, what's the roadmap that needs to be built out? And then how can you slowly chip away at that, knowing that it's going to be a process?
Mhm.
And being okay with the uncertainty, like it may not happen, like that's okay too. But the goal is to have those constant learnings and insights and then that gives you tools to then course correct as you move forward. And that's 100% a part of people's journeys, right? It's all a journey.
Yeah, it's the journey, and it's I think a lot of people are hesitant to start on the journey because like they're eager to go. It's like they want to put into a GPS like how do I become pro, and then just want to follow the instructions because if I do every step along this way, then I will be pro. And it really doesn't work that way. There's no set path, and everybody's journey to get there was a little bit different, right? So, for example, on my team, Mental has been playing since when I used to compete. He was like 11 years old and he's been playing Gears that entire time, right? And so like it wasn't until 2015, 2016 that he was a pro. So he clocked in 5 to 6 years of just playing the game because there was a passion for it and competing because there was a passion for it before there was like that, "Oh, you've achieved pro now." Whereas Powers, who's on my team right now, he was kinda in the same boat, and we needed a substitute. Actually, the Optic Gaming roster needed a substitute for an online tournament, and we're like, "Hey, he's good, like, let's just ask him." He's not on like a pro team, so he's allowed. And he joined, we won the tournament with him, and he had some amazing plays, and so now all eyes are on him because he's this next, like, prodigy player, and he gets signed to a pro team. So Mental had that 5 to 6 years where Vic had that just instant jump from being in Billy's shoes a couple years ago to now he's here, now he's got attention, now he's got the recognition. People are, wanting him on their team. So um, there's a lot of different paths. None of it is defined. Every single pro player is basically running through the jungle with a machete trying to find their way to that Mayan temple of professional gaming.
Yeah.
So that's a question I get asked the most is like, what do I need to do to be a pro player? And honestly, like, there's no right answer for that, but there's no real wrong answer for that. It's just about channeling your passion for the game that you're playing into something that people recognize, appreciate, and then one as part of their team, their squad, and going from there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think that'd be a good place to kind of to drop in. Like what would be, three things that you would want to encourage players to keep in mind as they're climbing the ranks or going after whatever their goals may be. And I know, like you said, it could be broad and there's no right or wrong way, but what might be three things like, hey, if you are going to focus on three things, like have these three things be the ones you really dial in on?
I think I'm going to answer this question as a coach, but also as a general manager, because I think in esports, especially in this era of social media is king and clout is king, um, there's a lot more that goes into it now, and there's a lot more opportunities that you can give yourself if you make the right steps early on. Um, so as a player, you have to have a passion for whatever you're playing. If you don't have the passion, then you're going to get outworked and outclassed by the person who does. Um, I mean, there's obviously some like outliers, but 99% of the time, that's the case. Because they're putting in the extra hours outside the practice, because they love playing the game, because they're committed to studying it. If you don't like it, you're not passionate about it, then you're not going to put in your 100%. That's just kind of human nature. So like the motto that I wanted to follow when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life as a college student was my mom saying, "Figure out what you love to do and find a way to make money doing it." So that's what I did. It was gaming. It was esports. Um, Going from there, knowing as a player that you are never like you can never be satisfied. You can never say like I'm the best and then take your foot off the pedal, because that moment that you do, there's going to be that next young version of you who is just as passionate and twice as hungry because they've had zero taste of success, and you're going to get off at 9 o'clock and they're going to get off at 11 o'clock, or you're going to start practice at 7 and they're going to start at 6, and they're going to catch up and then they're going to pass you, and then you're no longer the best. So you can't ever have that mindset of like I've made it or I'm here. I mean, that was a when we joined Optic, that was a really important lesson that Hex taught us. Was like the very first call we had, he was like, you guys have joined Optic. That does not mean you've made it. That does not mean you settle here. That does not mean you take your foot off the gas. That means now you have to bust your ass to prove that you belong here. And that's true for any aspiring pro player who hits a point where they start tasting success, that doesn't mean, oh, like I won $50 in a tournament, like I'm starting to make money off this now, like I've made it. That means, you have to bust your ass even harder to get to that point where you're the best. And that's like what we've done. Um, and then the last thing that I would say, the final tip is more from the management side, and that's building your brand on social media and putting your personality out there. Because a lot of players just focus so much on competing that they're not active on social media. And because of the era we're in, we're as much as it's great for you to be the like most talented player in the entire world, if nobody knows who you are, it doesn't matter. If nobody knows a way to get in contact with you, or if you are the most talented player in the world, but you are toxic as hell on social media and saying crazy things that you shouldn't be saying, then nobody's going to want to have you as part of their team. No sponsor is going to want to work with you. No players are going to want to work with you. So while you're focusing on building yourself in game, build yourself out of game, put yourself on social media, be interacting with other people in your esport, in your game, in like hobbies that you have, build that brand, be professional, and get those numbers up, the views up, because that's going to help sell you and your talent and get you more opportunities.
Awesome. Those are some great points. Man, thanks for coming on. It's been awesome, and you have such a depth and breadth of knowledge. Just acknowledge you for who you are in space and who you are for the players and the teams you've worked with, and really caring about the players. It's
Thank
something
you.
I've always respected about you and how you show up as a leader and as a manager, and really putting the players first and wanting to give them the best opportunity to be successful over time.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So where can people find out more about you? You got social media, links, big stuff coming up.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube. All of it is Thy Ashes, THY Ashes. I'd like to give a special shout out to UYU, the organization that I work for and that we compete under, and our sponsor Astro for supporting us with these, beautiful, fancy headsets, and and to you and Aim Labs, because you guys are awesome. Should I call it a program or a game? Because it plays like a game, but there's so much more depth to it. It's
So
almost
much
like a
more than
program.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but to you guys for everything that you do for the space, not only from the player development side, but just this kind of content as well. So, thank you for having me on, and thank you for everything that you guys do. It's been a blast.
Of course, brother. Well, thank you and have a great day, man.
Thank you. You too.
Cheers. Hey, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that episode with Ashes. I had a great time talking about the player development and the teamwork and communications, and then really talking about mental health. And the understanding of how you take care of your body and your mind is so important for your performance and longevity. And then also being vulnerable and reaching out for support when you are in need. And knowing that you're going to have all that love coming back to you. And it's really just about being open in your communication. And so we really hope you take that on and know that people are there for you and that they love you. So if you dig these videos, like it, comment, subscribe, check us out on Twitter and Instagram. We love making this content for you and hope you come back soon.